Record. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here with my friend Minter Dial. And do you want to just introduce yourself, Minter? And we're going to
Sure.
talk about your book, You Lead, and like how it relates to empathy.
Well, so I am not just your friend, Edwin. I'm a friend of the empathy circles and have been experiencing the power of empathy circles for well over 2 years, I think now. Of course, I also wrote a book on empathy and it was called Heartificial Empathy, putting heart into empathy and heart into business and artificial intelligence. And so I'm kind of that kind of guy, trying to put empathy into business. My network and my life has basically been in large corporates. And I want to say I unofficially practiced empathy within my exercising my role as an executive at L'Oreal and saw what it could do within a business. And I'm always trying to figure out how business can do good for society, for the people, as well as the bottom line, because at the end of the day, if you don't exist, you are no good. I mean, if you can't make money. So yes, that's me. And yeah, and I've just about to publish my new book, You Lead, Why Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And empathy is a big part of that.
Yeah, so I've looked at I curate a Facebook, not Facebook, but a Scoop It magazine. So I have different sort of topics, and one of them is empathy in business. And what I see a lot about empathy and leadership, within business. So maybe we could sort of explore that topic. Daniel Goleman, who's well known in emotional intelligence. He's talked a lot about empathy in his leadership. Says you really have to understand the people that you're leading. I've seen quotes from Oprah Winfrey. Empathy. Leadership needs empathy. So, what's your thought about empathy for leadership? In business, like where are you on that? Is it possible, or is it just are they just authoritarian, top down? Do what we tell you to do, and or what's your thoughts there?
So I've come to feel that there's a wave behind the word. So there's a lot of attention being paid to it. There seems to be overwhelming evidence of the benefit to being empathic. And I could break it down as to the interesting ways that the application of empathy could be useful for your business. And yet I continue to see huge numbers of disaffected employees, not happy at work. I see people complaining about user experiences as customers, about the way companies are operating in a sort of a merciless, rather mercenary approach to building their business. And so as much as we're talking about it, it does feel like there are very few people achieving it. And one of the interesting things that I've discovered is there's the notion of using empathy, and then there's the perception of feeling that the other was being empathic. And I mostly have been trying to think about using empathy in business to be better at you as a leader, at you as a marketer, at you as a customer sales agent or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily mean that by using it, the person who's on the receiving end, if he necessarily feels it. It's an abstract concept, but if I can encourage people to lean in on listening and not cloud their minds with all their ego trips and the things that they're worried about of the future and the performance they have to do and the bad experiences they had in the past, push that aside and be better able to listen, whether it's a colleague, the janitor, the sales agent, or a customer. Each of these times there's a great opportunity to listen in and to employ empathy, whether or not, as I say, the receptor feels the empathy is another gig. But my sort of impulsion has been to try to figure, take people to say, hey, you guys, wake up. An amazing opportunity. By the way, it's okay. It's going to help you make more money. It's not, we're not against that. That is the, you have to do that for your business, but it's a great conduit to making a better business.
Mm. So it sounds like at the core, you're seeing that it's, you want to have individuals learn how to listen or value listening or deep listening better. And this is going to contribute to your business, to your well-being. And
Yeah.
so you're really trying to promote that listening.
Right. Well, so the issue is that sometimes we sort of, there are some companies that have actually written empathy as a value. But that's horseshit, Edwin, because the company isn't being empathic. It comes down to the small individual relationships, and it can be inside the company between colleagues, a leader with his or her team, and then it can be with stakeholders and other partners that aren't necessarily customers, but they aren't also your employees. They are independent of you. And how do you employ empathy within that environment? Then there's thinking through in the shoes of customers and how they're experiencing your service or your product, website, and so on and so forth. So it's these individuals who are taking hold, doing this opportunity of listening, and then obviously then implementing something that's better for the organization. And so, yes, this is what I'm trying to do, is get that into the corporate world, because really the issue with empathy, or one of the things I like to say, or I tend to say, I don't know what I like to say it, is that there are two things that really kill people's abilities to be empathic. And the first is a lack of time. And the second is stress. And in a business environment, these two things are constantly present. Everyone's rush, got to get in, efficiencies, effectiveness, time schedules, calendar. Wait, 2 hours, Edwin? I don't have time for that. And then the stress factor, means I'm sort of going to have my fear mode in mind, and I'm going to be worried about my performance, or I'm concerned about the future. So I can't have the clarity of mind to listen in to the person who's in front of me. So in this business environment, as much as we're talking about it, there are a bunch of hurdles to making it happen.
Yeah. Well, there's one aspect that we're sort of addressing, I think kind of alluding to, was an individualistic view of empathy to a relational and cultural view of empathy. One of the criticisms I've seen that comes actually out of the women's studies about empathy was, women were dealing with the household, thinking in terms of the well-being of the whole family. And, this is the older days. And the men were out there battling, seen as individuals battling it out in the corporate world, for, to bring home the bacon for the well-being of the family. So that was the old model. But the men who were doing psychology, Freud, etc., they were seeing, well, health is being an individual, being strong, autonomous, thinking of your own self-interest. And that's what a healthy person is. So people would come to the psychology, to the therapy, and that was sort of the framework that was seen as health, right? Women would come into it, and they would the male psychologists, therapists would try to form them into the mold of what they thought was healthy, which was being like them, instead of saying, hey, relationships are important. This quality, this feeling of warmth and care and mutual support is important. And so there was like a branch of women's studies that say, we need a different form of empathy. We need a relational orientation towards empathy. And those are two different views with sort of different underlying premises. So I think that kind of comes into the business world too. It's like, is it everybody just out for themselves using empathy for their own self-interest? Or are we trying to create a cultural, environment, that is mutually supportive?
Yeah, so two white guys talking about women is always complicated, and right, and the truth is that when I did take as a minor at university women's studies, I was the only male in the group, but I certainly feel academically charged on this topic, and so I kind of hesitate with the generalizations, but they're underneath that. There's this notion of the individual and the relationships and the community. And in my new book, I talk about a paradox, and I think it kind of speaks to both, because it's not a masculine or feminine necessarily trait. This is for me a human trait. We need to belong and yet exist as an individual. So the community component is I feel like this is where I belong. This is my group. This is my gang. And my values are shared with this group. But once I go to this group, well, let's call it a party, if I'm wearing exactly the same clothes or a dress as somebody else at the party, I feel a little bit dwarfus. So I've lost my identity. So I still need to exist as an individual. And I think that's where the yin and the yang that Jung talks about, it reigns and moves it away from being just a female and male, where we all need to feel individual and recognized for that and heard as an individual. And yet we also need to belong. And the challenge at some bigger level is that as soon as you decide that you do need to belong, if you accept that premise, that means that you do not necessarily want to belong to others. So that there becomes a us versus them. So for example, you might like a sport, pick a team. Well, that's your team. So when you play the opponents, they're the enemy. And so that I think is part of our natural proclivity to want to identify a group, which means I'm with them, not with them. They're the others. So within that, in business and in general, the thing that's interesting is the intention. What are you intending to do with that empathy or with whatever your business you're running? And if you can, whether you're male or female, garner a bigger purpose to your organization than just making money for the shareholders, then you're onto something and you can galvanize people, and that's what you're about. And once again, that doesn't need to be for everybody. I think one of the things we have to watch out for is the tyranny of everybody for everything, where we're supposed to be nice with everybody, love everybody, and want to, help everyone. It's just not feasible. Plus, it breaks down when you come to this notion of community, who we recognize we belong to. And second of all, it's just not practical to want to try to do everything to everybody. You can't give away all your money and solve the big problems. You need to be focused. It's called being strategic. And at times, that's going to piss people off. So it's having that edge, saying this is who we belong to. This is who we are. We're not that. We're here. And the individuals within that subscribe. And then the individuals within that are heard and understood. So your intentionality is, what is the larger community? What is the larger good that you're doing with your business beyond just making that product or service and just making money for the shareholder? And if that intention is good, understood, and well shared throughout your team, then I think you can start creating a better culture of empathy and listening, because we know why we're in business together.
So you're envisioning an organization to have a clear sense of who they are, about their identity, and that it's the identity is beyond just self-interest. Is that sort of?
That's right. So there's the identity and the purpose. And those two elements sometimes can piss people off. You just can't go around thinking you have to please everybody all the time. It just doesn't work in a business environment. So I'm very much motored, Edwin, as you can tell by the fact is P&L, profit and loss, is part of our existence in business. And you need to pay attention to that. Otherwise you go out of business and you're helping nobody.
Yeah.
So even with great intentions, you're out of business, no good. So figuring out who is your community, who are you trying to serve, be brave enough and courageous enough to stand up for what you believe is important. And then think about your purpose. Make sure your purpose is beyond just that small little gang. So often in business, there's no purpose really other than just surviving and making money. And then the second failure is to have a purpose that's just lip service. You're just full of BS. You're saying that's what you want to do, but you never do anything. There's no actions that follow up.
Yeah, it's a good point. As in terms of an organization, I've seen the Democratic Party is making a big thing about empathy now. Like I had mentioned to you before, when Joe Biden was on the stage giving his acceptance speech, those huge banners and the big screens said the people have chosen empathy and I think truth, science. They kind of went through some series of values, and then I posted that, on my site. We got like 30,000 people on the Facebook group. It was like 9 out of 10 were cynical and skeptical about that. Say it's just words, the politicians, one person said, hey, that's really great. But there was overwhelming was sort of a cynicism if that was really true. So I think maybe that's what you're sort of addressing, that people have people say this is the way it is, but it's so.
Well, there's an overwhelming. I mean, Obama talked about the empathy gap, right? And there's an overwhelming mistrust. And if you look at the Edelman's trust survey, generally at the very bottom, along with secondhand car salespeople, that the perfect clunky car is going to work beautifully if you pay me $100, are politicians and marketers and executives. I mean, it doesn't take a microsecond for someone to rush out with their pocket with a can of BS spray and spray it on, you're full of shit. And so politicians suffer from this. Maybe they have great intentions. They usually come into it with great ideals, but little by little, those ideals, just like, by the way, a doctor and the Hippocratic Oath, beautiful ideals, but their empathy gets run out of them because they just don't have the steam for it. They don't have the energy for it. They don't have the time for it. And as much as there might be initially a good intention, it just gets pummeled out of them. And so then they're just yibber yabbering. And a lot of politicians, unfortunately, are beholden to a system where they have to get reelected. So they change their tone and tune according to who's going to elect them, which means they sound like they don't know what they stand for. They're just there to be elected, which is lovely, but it doesn't really mean they have a backbone. They're intent on their actions, or at least the words are going to turn into actions.
Well, I've been exploring this topic for about 14, 15 years now. And I found that in terms of actions, learning empathic listening, active listening based on the work of Carl Rogers, and, put that into the empathy circle process, is one of the best sort of practices, is a gateway practice. I mean, empathy is complex, but as a first step, easy gateway practice is sort of a first step. And I know you've been doing some empathy circles with CEOs and those people in business. I'm just wondering how your experience has been. I mean, you shared a bit before, but I wonder if you could share it here.
Yeah. So one of the extraordinary things. So I don't position the empathy circle with these people as the sort of the way that they're going to improve their lives, and but what I want them to come away with is, oh my gosh, I could really improve my listening. Because, and one of them was a TV presenter, or regularly on television, and having just done an empathy circle with me, was on television and fired me an email back right afterwards saying, oh my God, thank God I'd had the empathy circle, because I knew how to button my lip and just listen. Because when you're when you're a TV presenter, you got you already have the earphone in piece. Hey, Rutsch, you have to get off. You have to stop. You have to. You've got 2 minutes to go. So not good. Or you have So I just touched my headphones and they have sound. Can you hear?
I don't hear. No.
I have no idea how to turn it off.
Oh, are you able to hear me now?
I'm going to try again.
Testing, testing,
I just touched them on the outside.
testing,
All of
testing.
a sudden,
Did that help? Testing.
oh, we're back. Sorry
Oh,
about that.
great. No
So
problem.
I'm speaking to you, but I had this beautiful music powering
Oh,
through my ears,
cool.
which is very hard to speak and listen to.
Hmm.
But anyway, so what I do with these CEOs is I want them, or executives, I want them to understand how poor they are at listening, and it's a very safe environment where there are other big executives who are doing that, and as you know, they come into it with all these sort of anxieties, and also they're stressed because they usually have an enormous agenda and their timetable, wait a second, 2 hours to do this. I'm back-to-back meetings before, back-to-back meetings afterwards, not to mention the colossal number of emails I have to deal with, and allow for them to peel away that time to focus. And as you so rightly imbued in me, this need to go from not just 1 hour, but to the second hour. And when you get to the second hour, they're no longer doing the narrative, telling what they have to say. They sort of chilled and they're starting to get used to this idea. And as much as they have lots of thoughts going in their mind, they're starting to understand the power of listening. And the inevitable feeling at the end is, oh my gosh, I feel like I could really do a lot more of this. I could do a lot better at this. And that's for me, the aha, the win when I do it in business. Because we in business are pressured by time and stress, and we just don't have that clarity of mind, that sort of presence to listen in deeply to a worried employee, or to a stressed customer, or to a distributor who's got some alternative ideas. If you can listen in to the cues, of course, we're stuck with this little box that we have here, but we can't see my foot tapping, or, watching out for these other signs that we do as human beings in real to real experiences. Anyway, that's what I try to do.
Yeah, well, there is that issue of the time. I've done it. I mentioned to you in a hospital setting, and it's like, hey, we don't have time. It's like expensive. The doctors are expensive. We got so much going on. So that time issue is huge. But it does remind me of Stephen Covey. I don't know if you've heard, one of his quotes is, it's better to work this out before up front, these issues, versus later down the line where these issues go unresolved, because you're spending a lot of time kind of cleaning up all these unresolved sort of issues. So
Mm.
I think that sort of makes a case for trying
It's
to
like
do it up front.
it's like establishing a divorce proceedings when you're in love. It's much easier to do it then than when the shit hits the
Mm-hmm.
fan, and when you've already got so much built up angst and history of bad blood. Your ability to listen, that sort of clarity of listening thing, is just not happening. So building up a culture of listening before the shit hits the
Mm-hmm.
fan is
Right.
certainly a good idea.
Yeah, there's even based on the work of Carl Rogers, a group, something called Imago relationships. So they actually use this in relationships, like, hey, you need to be doing this ongoing to kind of head off issues before they kind of grow and or fester, and kind of so.
It makes me think of the power of small talk, or the use of small talk, and I tend to prefer to have deep conversations that are meaningful and sort of life moving kind of things. But small talk is a facet of warming it up. And yeah, it takes time, just to roll into a deeper conversation, because we don't necessarily have established the relationship to have that depth and honesty. So how do you get there? Well, you have to build up this thing called trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time. And so listening without interrupting, listening with a clean slate to what you're talking about, what your issues are, what's happening in your mind and your body and so on. Yeah, takes a lot of Yeah, time.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is that it's the deep listening that sort of builds trust. Is that what you're?
Well, I think it's part of it
Mm-hmm.
to the point of, there's nothing more funny than those type of people where I don't know if it happens to you, but get called up. Hey, listen, I really want to meet you. You sound really interesting. Oh, okay, thanks. So we set up a call, and then for an hour, we exchange. But 90% of the exchange is the other person talking about their lives. And at the end, they says, "Oh, you were really a great person." It's funny how people roll. They attribute listening to being great,
Mm-hmm.
just because so many people don't get heard. I think that there's a issue in our society outside of not having meaningful conversations, of people not feeling like they have a chance to talk to people who are prepared to listen in a neutral manner. It's like if I say that to Edwin, he's going to get pissed. I better not tell him, or that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or I already told you the story of the you told me, but I want to say it again. No, it's not going to happen. Or we build up these intolerances in our listening, like this the close communication bias, where because we know each other, I'm going to finish the sentences that you start off with, because we've known each other so long. That's what's going to happen. Well, that's not what I wanted to say. That angst builds in because we just know it. We kind of know each other too well, but we forget to remember each other.
So what I'm hearing again, you've come back. It sounds like to the listening, the importance, the benefits of deep listening. If you listen to people, they like you, they appreciate it. There's something positive. Sounds like you get a good relationship.
But they even think they know you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I
You're a
see.
great person. You listen to me for 50 minutes, waxing and waning on. You're a great person. You didn't tell me anything about yourself. All you did is reformulate what I say, and you're a great person. I find that kind of a sign of our times. Just like
Mm-hmm.
cat videos. Cat videos are the only thing that people click and like and laugh about. There's this, there's a dearth of abilities to listen, and if in that vacuum, if you manage to listen,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, people are going to start to like you.
Mm-hmm. So a good listener will be liked, and by you listening to them, they get a sense of who you are, and they feel like they know you. It's kind of what
Yeah,
I'm
and
hearing.
then
Yeah.
the big kicker is that actually, if you do listen, you're going to be able to, and you ask a few smart questions, you're going to be able to know how to better serve that person, deal with that person, relate with that person, depending on what your relationship, and the type of interactions you have, whether it's a customer, whether it's an employee, a colleague that doesn't report into you, and building up a network. It's phenomenal power on top of that. So there's only can win. The only
Mm-hmm.
thing is, do you create the environment for that? Do you have an agenda where that's built in? Edwin, one of the things that is really, I'm always asked, hey, how do you do all the things you're doing? And yet sometimes, because I'm only speaking now, Edwin, you're the one who's doing all the listening. Great guy.
Yeah, you really like me. You're really
Is it?
getting to know me.
You see what I say? You know what I'm saying? But so one of the things I used to say is, do you expect the unexpected? And in this crush for time that people have in business, they forget to plan for the unexpected. Oh, I didn't expect that. Oh, there's a traffic jam. I came late. Well, you're in New York. There are always traffic jams. So just plan around. Oh, well, I needed to get my coffee. Well, you knew you needed the coffee. You can plan for that too. And so so materially, what I did is I made sure that as I got up the ranks, that 50% of my day was free, which allowed for me to do deep thinking just by myself, Pomodoro technique. It allowed for me to have an open door so someone could come in and interrupt me but I'd allowed for that to happen. And occasionally I'd have sit down, and not every time. That's again another issue, is that the tyranny of listening or the tyranny of empathy doesn't work. You need to be able to do shit. You need to be able to be pragmatic and accomplish stuff. So it's finding that balance of time to allow for the listening to happen when you can. Anyway, that was something I talk about in my new book, about managing your time to allow for this, because if we know we need time to listen, then you need to plan for it.
Okay, so that sounds like the core message then is, hey, learn to listen better. Here's the benefits of listening. This is how it contributes to your well-being, to the company's well-being. So is that kind of distills it in a
Yeah.
nutshell?
And,
Yeah.
and what just to go to be exact, what I do is I talk about being more empathic, do more listening than you're currently doing, and you'll see the benefits. Because it's not about swinging from 0 to 100.
Right.
You've got to be more pragmatic. You got to do other shit. There's stuff you don't like to do. You have to run through things. You have to tell orders. That happens. But it's just about being more intentional about your listening and being more empathic during your day. And you ought to see benefits, knowing that you also have to do other stuff.
So it's moving empathy up, kind of the scale
Yeah.
of up the scale a little bit. Yeah, I agree with that too. That's how I see it. We're biologically wired for empathy. We're being empathic. It's more like we all have the muscles. It's just how do we strengthen the muscles, kind of be more peak, physical operating,
And something that I like about what you do sometimes, and I've observed, if you're not feeling in the right space before you go in, you even acknowledge that. And so having that self-empathy, the self-awareness that I'm prepared to listen, or I got stressed, by the way, I got a meeting coming up, or whatever is happening, that impinges on your ability to listen in a more timeless manner. And if you're feeling stressed and you feel it within you, and if you're aware of that, then at the very least, that's going to help you in your filter. If you can tell it to the other person, that's even bigger type of action.
Yeah, to sort of deepen the empathy and the listening is to be open and transparent about who you are. Yeah, and I think that really helps with the relationship, right? It becomes sort of more of a
Yeah, well,
shared
you're
mutual relationship.
showing that you're not perfect, because there's nothing worse than thinking that you're perfect. If everyone thinks you're the best, you know how to do it all the time. I wrote a book about empathy, and it's not uncommon for someone in my family to say, Minter, that wasn't very empathic.
I know the feeling. Yeah, exactly. So where are you going with this now? Where do you see your kind of the path, forward for yourself? You've done several books, you're doing consulting, I guess, and workshops, and what are you
Well,
doing
I'm
next?
so my book is hopefully going to lead to good things, and it'll be a little bit more of a platform to get into boardrooms to help them create an environment where engagement amongst employees is better for a bigger purpose. And that's really what I'm trying to achieve. How do I measure that? Well, I have a little idea that is just my circle, my community. I'm not trying to get to Satya Nadella, although that'd be lovely. I don't have a bigger span than just to try to feed into my network these positive ideas, and I do that through talking and a couple of seminars here and there, and consulting whenever I can into businesses, and setting realistic objectives into what they're doing, and making them feel better about themselves. Damn it, I think so many leaders are not good at thinking about themselves in the right way. They think of themselves more like in a perfectionist manner, and then when they hit midlife or later, it explodes because no one's perfect. But especially men, have tended to create this sort of bravado of, I can do everything, I can get up and do that. And that's just not a healthy place to be as a leader. And it's certainly not a healthy place to be as an individual. All you need to do is look at the number of disastrous marriages that break down when the man says, I'm not the man who I thought I was. I'm actually some kind of frail, vulnerable human being. and then the ego collapses, and depression sets in, and I don't have the same status as I had before, and that's not a good place to be. So this is what I'm trying to achieve, Edwin, in my own little way: create a better culture, more engaged, more self-aware leaders. And that's
Well,
it.
I do. Yeah, I'm there with you. You know, how do we? Because I think that is, if we see empathy as a personal value and that supports our connection, and I think it is a grounding value for just general well-being. And so I appreciate you sharing your insights and having these dialogues, and your friendship, and look forward to kind of continuing our discussion on this
it
important value in the
may,
future.
may it be a long and wonderful journey, Edwin. Thank you for having me on, talking about an important topic that we both share, and look forward to continuing on. I'll certainly be doing more empathy circles, as you know.
Yay.